Alright, if you're new here, you know the Sega Saturn is my favorite game system of all time, and what better way to showcase as many Saturn games as possible than the ultimate enemyzero approved, enemyzero Studios official Sega Saturn list of the best games ever from A to Z. We're going to look at the best Sega Saturn games today from A to Z, one for every letter, the best in that letter. And this will definitely be my longest, most involved Sega Saturn video ever, so I appreciate any likes or subscriptions or comments down below. And as always, remember, this is my opinion, not yours. Share yours below, after you subscribe, of course. This is mostly based on US releases, but there are some Japanese releases on the list for the Sega Saturn, which was released in 1995 in the US. And it doesn't have a big as library as the PlayStation 1. Obviously, you know, it had much smaller, shorter lifespan than the PlayStation 1. But it does have its fair share of really cool games that I like to showcase on my channel. So maybe if you check this list, you might see a game on here that you've never seen before and you want to give it a try it out. That's the sort of purpose of these lists right here. So without further ado, let us start with A. The best game starting with A in the Sega Saturn library is, of course, Albert Odyssey, Legend of Aldine. It was released in 1997 by Sunsoft and published by Working Designs. It originally started out on the Super Nintendo, but actually got canceled for that and actually got ported to the Sega Saturn with a lot of improvements. You could actually find old gameplay videos and screenshots of the Super Nintendo version. You can definitely see there's a pretty big difference there. And I love JRPGs. When the Saturn and the PlayStation was out, that was my JRPG golden years, if you will. That's really what I played the most of, and I love Albert Odyssey. I love the graphic style. It's 2D pixel graphics. It's old school, you know, turn-based battle system. Nothing fancy there. You could have 5 characters in your battle party, which is pretty darn awesome. And in the 32-bit era, we're in the CD audio era, so the music, you know, made a jump up. And I just love the personality of Albert Odyssey. It's one of those quirky Working Designs translations that some people hate, but I love it. I think it's hilarious. There's Let's Plays on the channel, and that's definitely one of the strengths. It's not, you know, dark and moody like a lot of the RPGs at the time. It's, you know, very fun, very classic JRPG that's got a great graphic style, and it's hilarious. Alright, moving on to B. The best B in the Sega Saturn library is Battle Garegga. Battle Garegga is a vertical shoot-'em-up, released in the arcades and then ported to the Saturn by Raising in 1996. It's a Japanese-only title. And the real strength of this game is the graphics. The graphics are so good. There's so many sprites on screen. The sprites are animated so well. The gameplay is really fast. It's really furious. It's a pretty hard game. It actually has been re-released on some modern systems. I have the limited run PS4 version. So it's not stuck on the Saturn like a lot of the titles on this list are. They're stuck on the Saturn. They've never been ported anywhere. It has had ports and digital versions along the way. And I've always loved shooters. They're super fun to me, although I'm just not all that good at them. And I really like this game. It's a very quality shooter from the Sega Saturn time that really shows off how many sprites it could fit on screen at once. The only negative for it, I would warn people about, the only thing I actually don't like about it, is actually the bullets aren't color-coded. So they blend in with the background and they blend in with ship debris quite a lot. So to me, it makes the game even harder because sometimes I can't see the bullets. So I wish they color-coded the bullets a little bit better, made them, you know, bright pink or bright yellow or something like a lot of shooters do. But that's really the only drawback of the game. It's pretty difficult and you can't see the bullets very often. But Battle Garegga gets a thumbs up for me. I believe there is a mode in the game that color coats the bullets so they're easier to see, but I haven't tried it yet. C was a little difficult to decide, but I had to settle on Christmas Nights. Which is a game I've talked about before. It's a Christmas-themed version of Nights into Dreams, created by Yuji Naka of, Sonic fame. And it's easily one of the greatest games on the Sega Saturn. It was released in December of 1996. It was a Christmas present, essentially, from Sega. It was completely free. They spent a lot of time and development resources to make this game an amazing experience, and it was completely free for the fans. Like, that is so amazing. And Nights into Dreams, spoiler alert, maybe it's the end pick, I don't know, we'll see. But Nights into Dreams was definitely a super unique platformer. There's almost nothing like it even to this day, with the sense of flight that it gave you as you fly through the levels and collect orbs. It's definitely got a heavy emphasis on memorizing the levels, and speed to get through the levels. Speed and finesse as you're flying through the air with the 3D analog controller. There's almost no other game in this era, at least, that really gave you that sort of sense of awe, that sense of flight that Nights gave you. And man, the Christmas theme one, it's got new music in it, it's got some new graphic assets, it's got Sonic hidden in there. There's a lot of amazing things about Christmas Nights into Dreams that definitely make it my pick for the C game on the system. A game you can't get anywhere else either, stuck on the Saturn. Alright, and D stands for Dubby! Dubby is enemyzero Studios' official sponsor right now, so check the link below for 10% off. Use our coupon code enemyzero and try out Beach and Peach. It's pretty amazing. The product is great, and I wouldn't let them sponsor me if I didn't believe in the product. It's delicious. Try the sampler pack and you get a shaker with that. D was really difficult for me, okay? There's 3 choices and I kept going back and forth between them. Daytona USA Championship Edition, Dead or Alive, or Dragon Force. And I think I settled on Daytona USA Championship Edition. I've said before, I like the first Daytona USA on the Saturn a little bit better because I think it's a little funner, because Championship changed the controls a little bit. But objectively, the Championship Circuit Edition version is definitely the best version. And Daytona USA is one of those games that changed my life back in the day, especially the arcade version. The arcade version was just awe-inspiring, right? And when it came home to the Saturn, the first Daytona USA, it was great, but there was definitely some issues with it, like the graphical pop-in and stuff. Well, Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition, they fixed, for the most part, most of those things. There was a reduction in pop-up. There was an increased frame rate, so it was 30 frames per second, sort of locked in. There was new cars, there's 2 new courses, a 2-player mode, and it worked with the steering wheel and the 3D analog control pad, the 3D pad. It was actually developed by Sega AM3, and they actually, a lot of the tools and the lessons they learned from the Sega Rally Championship port to the Saturn, they actually used that same engine to make this version of Daytona USA. If you don't know what Daytona USA is, it's an arcade racer. It's not Gran Turismo or anything, but it's purely, completely, awesomely fun. Alright, E. E, of course, is for enemyzero. No, not me, silly. enemyzero, the Sega Saturn game. Was released in 1996. It's a horror-themed FMV game with some first-person segments in it. Developed by Warp and directed by the late Kenji Eno, who also directed D and D2 for the Dreamcast. And he produced a lot of music for games over the years too. And again, this is a super unique game, and it's completely stuck on the Saturn. Never been ported anywhere, probably never will be, because it's one of those sort of quirky, unique games. Obviously, like I said, it's a full motion video game for the most part. A lot of the, all the story scenes are full motion video. The quality's pretty good. It's obviously a little grainy like all FMVs are back in the day, but it had these really cool first-person segments in the game. And the first-person segments are what made the game so frustrating and so intense. Because the enemies in the game, these alien entities that are sort of invading your base to, kill you, eat your heart out, they're completely invisible. You cannot see them whatsoever until you actually shoot them. You get a gun in the game, and the gun fires. You have to charge it up and shoot it at a certain point. So, like if an invisible enemy is coming at you, you have to time the gun right, or the gun will miss and the enemy will kill you. And to make it even, to throw another little loop in there, the only way you even know an enemy is around you is the little beeps. You have a little like radar detector, and if an enemy is near you, it will start beeping, and the tone of the beeps will tell you if it's to the side of you, to the front of you, to behind you. And man, it's such an amazingly intense experience. If you like horror games, or if you like sort of, intense games like, Alien Isolation or something like that, then this was one of the precursors to a lot of that stuff. It's such a well-made game. It's so difficult. It's frustrating, sure. But it's definitely fun. It's definitely well-made. And I liked it so much back in the day. I was such a huge fan of it. That's how I got my sort of moniker for my channel. That's how I became enemyzero. Alright, F is a fun one. This is definitely Fighters Mega Mixed. Released in 1997 by Sega, Fighters Mega Mix was a sort of combination of Virtua Fighter and Fighting Vipers, two other, obviously classic fighting game franchises by Sega. Well, they combined them, and it's a blast. When you start playing the game, you can choose either mode. You can choose the Virtua Fighter mode or the Fighting Vipers mode, and it changed the gameplay a little bit to play more like that franchise than the other, if that makes sense. And it's just completely fun, goofy game. It's got goofy characters. It definitely doesn't take itself too seriously. The graphics are great. The battle arenas are great. It's definitely a good middle ground from the technical Virtua Fighter to sort of, a little bit looser Fighting Viper style. It's definitely a great mix in between the two. And that's why it's the best F game, I think. It combines two of the best fighting games on the system into one. It's a mashup of epic proportions that equals fun for you and the whole family. GGG. G equals Guardian Heroes. Developed by my favorite development team of all time, Treasure, Guardian Heroes is a 2D beat-em-up released in America in 1996. It was the second Sega Saturn game I ever got. It's not stuck on the Saturn. It's had digital upgraded versions throughout the years. It's got a Game Boy sequel, so there is other ways to play it along the way, but I really do like the Sega Saturn original. It's a 2D beat-em-up, but it's not just completely side-scrolling, and it's not free movement either. You can't just walk sort of up and down into the back room and out of the background. You actually have 3 planes that you can jump in between. But where Guardian Heroes gets set apart from a lot of other 2D beat-em-ups is just the personality, the characters. It's got a cool, story. It's got multiple endings. You actually choose your stage as you play through the game. You can choose your next destination, and you can get one of 5 or 6 different endings, which I have videos of all the endings up, by the way. It's got a 2-player cooperative mode and a 2-player versus mode. In the versus mode, you could use literally almost any character in the game once you meet them in the game. There's so many different characters, and each character has its own move set, which raises it up into another level of coolness, if you ask me. The graphical effects are great. There's a lot of slowdown in the game, but I do love the pixel art. I love all the sprites on screen at once. I love the scaling and everything. Treasure is a team of graphical magicians, okay? And so there is some slowdown in the game, but a lot of the other classic Treasure, like, wow, I can't believe they did that graphical effects, are in there. And again, it's one of those games that's just completely, truly just fun. Alright, H stands for Hyperduel. A shooter by Technosoft of Thunder Force fame. It was released in Japan in 1996. It was not released in America, so this is another Japanese-only title. I believe it's stuck on the Saturn. I don't know of any ports anywhere, but I could be wrong. Let me know below. It's not the best shooter ever, for sure, but it's really fun, and it has a killer soundtrack. Technosoft is known for its soundtracks, and this is no exception at all. What sets it apart from other games is your ship can actually change to a robot. And when you're a ship, you can only shoot forward, move around the screen just like a traditional 2D horizontal shooter. But when you change to a robot, you can actually aim your shots up or down and lock them into that direction. So the gameplay definitely varies a little bit. There's different ships with different weapons, and each ship can turn into the robot at will. So it's definitely super unique. That's why it's on the list. It's not the greatest shooter of all time. It is what I think the best H game on the Sega Saturn though. It's very, very fun, and it definitely deserves a little bit of credit for being unique, being super fun, and having a killer soundtrack. I is going to be for In the Hunt. Developed and published by Irem. It's a super unique submarine shooter. Yes, you're a submarine. You're not a jet, you're a submarine. So you're underwater, obviously. And definitely the greatest asset of the game, for sure. For sure is the graphic style, which is very similar to Metal Slug in just the way the animation and stuff is. There's so much sprite work in this game. There's so many sprites moving on screen at once. There is some slowdown. That is the drawback of the game. It actually wasn't optimized very well on the Sega Saturn. This did come out on the PlayStation and other systems, and there is a decent amount of slowdown once things get, rocky on the screen. But graphic style and the uniqueness of the gameplay, you being in a submarine, because when you're in the submarine, you shoot forward, but you can also drop like depth charges and stuff below you, and you actually have a missile that shoots up too. And when you actually reach the surface of the water, your missiles change into like homing missiles. It changes a little bit because you're fighting not only things under the water, you are fighting things on top and over the water too. So it's definitely unique in that sense. But man, oh man, when I played this game, I was blown away by the graphics. I love Metal Slug. Metal Slug is easily the best, probably the best series of 2D games of all time, graphic style wise. And so just imagine a submarine shooter with the graphic style of Metal Slug, with the, the artistry and the pixel work and how many, sprites are on screen at once, all the things going on, the destruction, the explosions, everything. It's such an amazing visual game. It's pretty fun too. It's pretty hard, but But shooters are hard. But In the Hunt, amazing game. Alright, J, there was slim pickings at J a little bit, but it's going to be Jikoyu Oshaberi Herodias, Forever With Me. Herodias is a parody shooter, essentially, by Konami, which makes the Gradius series, right? And so Herodias is a sort of lighthearted parody of the Gradius games, Gradius, however you want to pronounce it, which uses the same power-up system. So if you have played Gradius, then you know the option system. You get power-ups, and it moves the little icon along the power-ups you can get. Obviously, the better power-ups are down on the line, so you have to save up more to buy it. And Herodias follows that system, but it's super lighthearted and super fun at the same time. It was released in Japan in 1996, and obviously, by the title, you can tell it came out in Japan only. And easily one of the biggest strengths of it is there's just so many different ships to choose from. And each different ship has different weapons, and it's got different weapon options on the bottom from the power-ups. There is some carryover to the weapons, but a lot of them are unique in between ships, which is pretty amazing. It's definitely a worthy shooter to have on the list. It's very fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's a parody, like I said. It's got, cutesy enemies and ships, and it's just a fun time. K stands for KO, Flying Squadron 2. Another Japanese-only release. It was developed by Victor Entertainment, 1996. It was actually a sequel to a shooter. The first part was just a shooter, a 2D side-scrolling shooter, but they changed it for this one. It's mainly a 2D side-scrolling platformer, but it does have some shooter stages still sprinkled in. And the biggest strength of this game is honestly the personality again. The personality, the graphics, the pixel art, the artistry behind the pixel art. It's so good. It could be a little more fast-paced. It's definitely a little slower paced. It's a little difficult, but it's such a beautiful game. Beautiful game. And I really commend the creator of the game. The creator of the game actually got upset that the PlayStation was pushing towards no more 2D games. I don't know if you know this, but the PlayStation, when it came out, had a rule. The US PlayStation, sorry. Sony, US. No 2D games allowed. And it infuriated the creator of the Flying Squadron games. And he was like, okay, well, I'm going to make the best 2D game I can, just to sort of stick it to him a little bit. And this is what he came up with. And the game is just, it's definitely a magical game. Super expensive nowadays because a lot of people know about it, but it's very fun. I love the shooting stages, but I also love the platforming stages, which make up the most of the game. And tons of personality. The pixel art is amazing. It's definitely my pick for K for sure.
The orbs originally belonged to our ancient kingdom, you know. So why don't you just go home, or else? Sivy1, get her!
L, Legend of Oasis. Known as the Thor series in other categories, Legend of Oasis was made by Ancient and published by SEGA in North America in 1996. And I absolutely loved this game when it first came out. This game was one of those pillar games that made me think, oh man, the 32-bit era is going to be such a big jump over the 16-bit era. I really think Legend of Oasis as a series is my favorite quote-unquote Zelda clone of all time, because it plays a lot like the old school Zelda, but it's so different in a lot of ways too. Super unique. This is the sequel. Legend of Oasis is the sequel. The first one was actually on the Sega Genesis called Beyond Oasis, and that one was definitely pretty good. Legend of Oasis just leveled up in every sort of way. It's got a bunch of different weapons to have, and the big unique thing about it is there's elemental sprites in the game. You befriend these elemental sprites as you go through the game. Water, fire, earth is one, wind is one, I believe. And there's a lot of puzzles in the games. And a lot of them are elemental based, meaning you need the fire one to do this one. You need the water one to do this one, to, melt ice or something like that. And when you solve a puzzle in the game, it really makes you feel good, because some of them are super difficult to sort of summon an elemental sprite too. Like if you have fire but you need water, you actually would need to find a water source. Fire your elemental bangle at the water to create the water spirit. So you couldn't just summon them anytime. So it led to really complex puzzles and everything. I love the graphic style. I love the music. The control could use a little work, but it is what it is. There's a lot of cool bosses in the game. It's definitely one of the best Zelda-like, overhead, action RPGs of all time for sure. And I absolutely love Legend of Oasis. So good. Stuck on the Saturn. All right, M was another hard one to choose, but I think I decided on Mega Man X4. Mega Man X4 is my favorite Mega Man X game of all time. It was released on the Saturn in 1997, developed by Capcom. I love the Mega Man series. 2 and 3 are two of my fondest childhood memories, which I'll go over in a video. Eventually, 2 and 3 are like the GOATs, the music and everything about them. But when the X series actually did come out, it actually started on the Super Nintendo with X 1, 2, and 3. I was definitely ready for the X series to sort of level it up a little bit because, you know, the original Mega Man formula from the Nintendo was kind of tired at the time. And man, X4 was when it just skyrocketed. I loved playing as Zero. That's the biggest strength of this game, I think, is playing as Zero, because I definitely liked Zero, and you can loosely play as him a little bit in X3, but X4 he was a complete, a full main character, took the place of Mega Man. When you start the game, you actually choose Mega Man or Zero, and Zero was so amazing because all his weapons were different. In Mega Man, you get a weapon, and when you put it on, you obviously just shoot whatever the weapon does, you shoot it. But Zero, his weapons were like Street Fighter like moves on the controller, and he definitely made the game harder, but he made the game so much funner too. It was so good because of Zero. The graphics are great, the cinemas are classic Capcom cinemas with terrible voice acting.
Motivation in life. Now go, destroy him. That's an order.
And can be forgotten and flushed down the toilet of time. But man, Mega Man X4 was so good, so good. It was definitely a Mega Man game that really leveled up the series in the long run. And it's my favorite because of Zero. It's so cool. I love Zero. Not just because his name is Zero, okay? But I love it. There is an honorable mention for M. It was almost a tie in this category, so I felt like I had to mention Marvel vs. Street Fighter. Another Capcom title. It's one of the best fighting games ever made. It was released in 1998. It used the 4 meg RAM cartridge, and it combined everything I loved in the world. Fighting games, 2D graphics, Capcom, Marvel superheroes, and Street Fighter, all combined into one. I really do believe this is the best fighting game on the Sega Saturn. Period, end of story. I love the Vampire Savior series, but this is where it's at. This is, the tag team battles, all the characters I love from my childhood. And so it was almost a tie between this and Mega Man X4, but I had to go with X4 because it was so unique and, Zero. N. What could N be? I gave you a spoiler. I warned you earlier, okay? N is definitely Night into Dreams. Nights into Dreams was developed by Sonic Team, and it's a one-of-a-kind experience. Originally it came with the 3D analog controller. And again, like we talked about earlier during Christmas nights, Nights was such a unique experience that gave you a real sense of flight. Like it really felt like you were flying with the 3D analog controller. It was the first game that was, exclusively sort of designed for the 3D analog controller. And it was so amazing. It was so smooth. Each level was a full 3D world, which was sort of cutting edge for the Saturn. You actually couldn't see, the world as you were playing, but if you ran out of time, you would turn into, a human, a little boy, a little girl, and you'd fall to the ground and you'd have to, walk to get your, the orbs, the blue orbs, whatever they're called. And you could actually see the full 3D world. There's definitely a lot of pop-in and graphical issues because we all know the Saturn doesn't do, full complete polygons like the PlayStation did. But the graphic fidelity, the gameplay, the music, everything was just amazing in Nights into Dreams. It was a super unique experience you couldn't get anywhere else. It's super fun to pick up to this day, and I highly recommend it. O was extremely lacking, but I had to choose something, so I went with Off-World Interceptor Extreme.
Plasma. Nitro.
It's a third-person vehicular combat game, originally on the 3DO. So that should give you a hint about the quality of O games on the Saturn, okay? The Saturn version came out in 1995, and it's okay. The gameplay is decent. You basically just drive forward. You shoot things. You have missiles too. You collect power-ups. You can collect money to buy, missiles in between levels and stuff. And like I said, the gameplay is decent. It's decently fun. The full motion video scenes are hilariously bad, just like a lot of full motion video scenes on the 3DO and back in the day. So it's not the greatest game ever. It's relatively fun for, a little bit. And it's, I don't know, I guess it's the best O game on the Sega Saturn. If you have any other suggestions, let me know below, please. P was another close one, but it has to be Panzer Dragoon Saga. Power Slave is in this category too, and it was definitely hard to choose in between the two. But Panzer Dragoon Saga is, what can I say about this that I haven't before? It's literally one of the most unique, thoughtful, well-made JRPGs of all time, and it's stuck on the Saturn. It came out in 1998, developed by Team Andromeda. And again, don't mind my love for the Panzer Dragoon, franchise. It's my favorite franchise of all time, but it's a super unique RPG with a very heartfelt story, a very emotional story, a very unique battle system, which is the strength of it to me. It's turn-based battles, but you're actually on your dragon flying. You could actually fly in sort of around the enemies and to try to find their, weak points and stuff like that. You have magic attacks, you have regular attacks, you can use items, you can switch dragon forms between, agility form, defensive form. And there's even a radar, a classic radar in the center of the screen that'll be green, red, or clear. And if you're in a red area, then that means you can really get hit with a heavy attack. So you got to try to avoid that area. So the gameplay and the battles are sort of a mix between a free flight sort of game, the on rails original Panzer Dragoon games, and a turn-based RPG. And it's such a magical meld of different gameplay styles. They did it so well. Is it worth, $1,600 to play it? No game's worth that much. It's a little on the shorter end, but it's easily in my top 3 RPGs of all time. It's my top 8 RPGs of all time used to be Final Fantasy VII, Panzer Dragoon Saga, and the 3 would change a little bit, probably Final Fantasy maybe 6 or so, but it's definitely in that top 3 at all times. I love the game, I love the story, I love the music, the graphics were great, the battle system was the best. It's one of the best battle systems for an RPG of all time, and it's a super emotional experience to play through the game. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing RPG that is stuck on the Sega Saturn.
悪い夢でも見たのか？
あの人を殺したの。私が。夢？
Q is definitely Quake. And look, I know, this is not the best version of Quake by any means. However, on the Sega Saturn, the game literally should almost not exist. And it's an amazing technical achievement that it even exists on the Sega Saturn. It was made by the wizards at Lobotomy Software, the now defunct Lobotomy Software. And when the ports were first discussed about Quake on the Sega Saturn, there was a lot of people in the development community who said it could never be ported. And, even Lobotomy Software had problems with it at first. And then they decided, they made Power Slave also one of the best first-person shooters on the Sega Saturn. And so the engine they used for Power Slave, called the Slave Driver engine, they actually used it for Quake too. And again, remember, technical stuff. The Saturn doesn't do polygons like the PlayStation. The Saturn has wireframes that it sort of puts sprites over to simulate 3D, right? So a port of Quake on the PlayStation was much easier to do than a port on the Saturn, but Lobotomy did so well on this port. The Saturn version of Quake is probably better than the PlayStation one, even though the PlayStation one is technically better suited for this port. So, you know, it is a little dark, it is a little grainy, yes, but the gameplay is super smooth. Everything in the world is 3D. The enemies are 3D, the items are 3D, everything. And it was one of the first and only Saturn games that was like that. Most of the 3D shooters on the Saturn were a mix of 3D and 2D sprites to sort of balance it out a little bit. Quake was completely 3D. It's so good. The lighting effects are amazing. Visually, the game is absolutely amazing. The soundtrack by Trent Reznor was amazing. There was a few levels that I actually couldn't remake in the Saturn version, which they replaced with new exclusive levels. Like this port and Lobotomy software are so good. It's so good in their time. And so it's definitely the easily the best Q game on the Saturn. For R, what else could it be but Radiant Silvergun? Another treasure game and my favorite shooter of all time. I do think Ikaruga. In my opinion, Ikaruga is the best shooter of all time. However, Radiant Silvergun is my favorite, if that makes sense. I love Radiant Silvergun. It came out only in Japan in 1998. I got my copy from a US EV Games. They held it for me, and you know, it was one of my prized possessions all through my teenage years. It's a port from an arcade game, but the amazing thing that the Saturn version did is it has sort of an exclusive save system in it, where you would play through the game. There's 3 different weapons, and the 3 different weapons you could actually combine with the other weapons. So there's different buttons to, you know, combine them, or you can hit both buttons at once. So, you know, if there's a straight up shot and a homing shot and you combine them, you create another weapon. So there's actually, you know, a combination of different weapons depending on your playstyle. And the more you use a weapon, the more it levels up. So, you know, the more you use the A weapon, you know, you could finish a playthrough and it's level 3 or so. And the awesome thing about the Saturn version in this game is it actually saved your progress of your weapons, because the first time you played it, you wouldn't get very far. Even if you're a really good shooter player, you know, the enemies have too much health, your weapons are too weak. So you would only get to, you know, the first stage boss or something like that. But you could save your game, and the next time you play through the game, your weapons would resume the level you died at. So now the next time you play through, you get a little bit farther. Then you die again, save your weapons again, go through again, and your weapons are a little stronger. And you go through like that till you beat the game. That was amazing. As someone who loves shooters but is, you know, not the best at them, I'm okay, but I'm not the best. But that was an amazing way to play through a game. It had a quirky sort of anime storyline in the background. It had, you know, Star Fox type, you know, chat bubbles on the screen as you're flying and stuff too. So it wasn't just the, hey, shoot things. There was a storyline there. An anime, goofy, lighthearted storyline, which again, in Treasure style. And it was amazing. The music is some of my favorite shooter music of all time. There's not a lot of different tracks in the game, but the tracks that are there are some of my favorite of all time. They're absolutely amazing. Radiant Silvergun is so amazing. There's a point-based combo system in the game. If you like to play through that way, you can combo together different color enemies as you go and, you know, rack up super high points if you only shoot like blue enemies or something like that. The game has a lot going for it. It's so fun. And it's very accessible with the Saturn mode. It's amazing. S was another kind of hard one, but the best S game for the Sega Saturn is Sega Rally Championship Plus. Sega Rally is one of the best arcade ports on the Saturn, taking the Model 3 Classic and bringing it home with minimal downgrades, and I absolutely loved it. I was a huge fan of rally racers back in the day. I definitely liked them more than street racers. at the time. I just liked the physics of, sliding. It was released in 1996, and due to the limitations of the Saturn, though, compared to the Model 3 arcade hardware, they had to almost fully remake it for the Saturn hardware, which to me makes it even more amazing that they can get so close to the arcade original. It definitely obviously was a downgrade in graphics, but for the Sega Saturn, it is easily one of the best looking Sega Saturn games. Like, it was so good looking. And over the years, this is the Championship Plus edition. So there's different versions on the Sega Saturn. There was the original Sega Rally, and then they released a Japanese version with some minor improvements to it, called the Plus version. And then the US, that came back to the US as the US Netlink edition. But the minor improvements on the game were, improved graphics, a little better gameplay. And, the best version is the best version. It's the Plus version. But Sega Rally Championship is so much fun. It's so much fun. There's not a lot to it. It is an arcade racer. There's only, 3 tracks. There's only a couple different cars. But again, it's not meant to be a Gran Turismo experience. It's Sega Rally. It's fun. The graphics are some of the absolute best on the Sega Saturn. And the control, especially... The big thing that the Plus version added was analog control with the analog 3D controller. And man, when you play it with that controller, oh, it's so good. It's so good. That almost makes the version, the best version, just that alone. So I would highly suggest, if you like racing games, that you try Sega Rally Championship or Sega Rally Championship Plus. The Netlink edition, or even the Japanese version, is fine. Sega was firing on all cylinders with its racing games back in the day. Alright, T is the next letter, and T definitely stands for Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider is the game that jump-started an entire genre. It was released in 1996, developed by Core Design and published by Eidos. And to say it was revolutionary would be selling it too short. There was almost nothing else like this that had come before, and every person my age that grew up around my age wanted to be Indiana Jones at some point when they were a kid. And, Tomb Raider was really the closest thing to that in video game form. The first Tomb Raider was the only one that actually came out on the Saturn, and much like Quake on the Saturn, Tomb Raider almost probably shouldn't exist on the Saturn due to the differences between programming on the PlayStation and the Saturn, where the PlayStation used real polygons, which is why when they actually, after they finished the first Tomb Raider, the reason why 2 and the rest of them didn't come to the Saturn is because they figured it out. They figured, hey, the PlayStation is so much easier to program for. It uses polygons, so, that's where we're gonna go. So, this was the only one the Saturn got. But that doesn't mean this port is bad. Just like Quake, like I said, this game probably shouldn't exist technologically on the Saturn. But it looks almost as good as the PlayStation version objectively. And it doesn't stop it from being an amazing port. It really showed that the Saturn could stay close to the PlayStation in the 3D department, as long as development teams tried, which they gave up on trying pretty quick. But Tomb Raider's strength is just the sense of sort of exploration. Like, there's not a lot of combat in the game. There's animal once in a while that you could shoot and stuff. But, it was an amazing experience just sort of losing yourself in these old temples and old tombs and just exploring. Trial and error was the name of the game on Tomb Raider. So it was frustrating at times. It had the tank controls in it, but it definitely, I do think that the first Tomb Raider was absolutely revolutionary. And, on the Saturn especially, since it's the only version it got, it's definitely a special title on the Saturn for sure. It's fun, it's hard, it's amazing to explore, it's all of the above. Alright, U stands for Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. The Saturn version of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 was released in 1996. It was probably the home version that was closest to the arcade original version of Mortal Kombat 3. Not exact, but it was definitely the best version for sure. What Ultimate added over the original arcade release of 3 is some new modes, including an endurance match, there was gameplay balances, and there was more characters that actually weren't in the original version. So Obviously, Mortal Kombat 3 is a 2D fighter, classic 2D fighter, super gory. It doesn't really play like Street Fighter. It's definitely got its own style. Mortal Kombat 3 was actually a really different style than Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. It was very combo focused, and the gameplay was super fast. And so, a lot of people didn't like the transition between 2 and 3, but 3 definitely has its place. And so the ultimate version were the home versions of Mortal Kombat 3 with all that extra stuff added, like I said. And this was really the ultimate version of the third game. It had all the brutality of the old Mortal Kombat, and it was definitely fun. It was super fun learning, the fatalities and just watching the fatalities. And there's a ton of content in the game. There's a ton of different fighters and everything. It definitely is the ultimate version for sure. It runs really good, it controls really good, and it's definitely a pretty amazing port.
Jade wins.
All right, for V, I ultimately chose Virtua Fighter 2. V could have been 100 different things. Virtual Racing, Virtual On, there's a million different virtual games. So, but it's got to be Virtua Fighter 2, right? Virtua Fighter Part 1 was the first 3D fighting game ever. It was revolutionarily created by Yu Suzuki. But Yu Suzuki also knew he could do better than the flat shaded 3D models of the first game. And there was a lot of people, again, that thought the Saturn might not be able to do a port of one of the most popular and influential arcade games, especially in Japan, of all time. Virtua Fighter 2, when it came out in Japan arcades, was a revelation. I believe it was one of the best-selling arcade games still to this day of all time. Like, there were lines out of arcades, blocks long of people just waiting to play this game. And when the Sega Saturn version came out, people were blown away by how faithful the port of it was. It was almost arcade perfect and even added 2 new characters to the rosters. The 3D models now had textures to them, so it wasn't just flat shaded 3D assets like the first game was. And the game ran at 60 frames per second because of the Saturn's 2 VDP processors. It's an amazing, amazing technical achievement that this exists on the Saturn. It looks so good. There's definitely a lot of difference in the graphics if you compare the backgrounds, especially to the arcade original. But the Saturn is so different than the arcade hardware power-wise. The Saturn version looking as good as it does is an amazing achievement. Virtua Fighter 2 is a super technical fighter. It doesn't have a lot of flash and stuff, and that's where, Tekken was making a case for itself on the PlayStation at the time because it used a lot of, flash and graphical effects, and, it was more on the Street Fighter side than the, Virtua Fighter side, which was almost like, real fighting styles, realistic things other than the floaty jumping, obviously. But anyways, Virtua Fighter 2 on the Sega Saturn was an amazing port. It's one of the greatest, most influential fighting games of all time, and it definitely is the best V game on the Sega Saturn. W stands for nothing else but World Series Baseball 98. If I told you that there was a time when Sega ruled the baseball video game genre with an iron fist, you probably wouldn't believe me. Especially if you're young, you wouldn't believe me. Well, they did with World Series Baseball. The last released on the Saturn was 98, which was released in 1997. Yeah, make that make sense. But World Series Baseball at the time on the Saturn was easily the best baseball game of all time. It was highly praised for its realistic, sort of innovative batting and pitching interfaces, where it used sort of the box zones on the screen. You can aim at the box, you can do different pitches with buttons. It was super innovative at the time, and it got a lot of accolades from it. There was 3 World Series Baseballs on the Sega Saturn, and all 3 of them were literally the best baseball games ever, continuously as they came out. World Series Baseball was super influential to MLB baseball and, the EA baseball games too. Like, they all stole stuff from World Series Baseball, but it was so good. I'm not a big baseball game player anymore. They're kind of boring, but I did love World Series Baseball at the time. It's, super fun. The graphics were generally pretty good. The gameplay was cutting edge. Man, Sega was king of the baseball world back in the Saturn days for sure. And World Series Baseball is definitely the best, W game on the Saturn.
He pulls it. 3 up and 3 down.
All right, what could X be other than X-Men versus Street Fighter?
Here you go!
This is X-Men versus Street Fighter.
I mentioned Marvel versus Street Fighter earlier, which was the sequel to this one. So there was a couple games before this one. There was X-Men Children of the Atom. There was Marvel Superheroes. But again, this is when Capcom leveled it up. X-Men versus Street Fighter. Oh my goodness, it was so good. It was the first game to feature the tag team gameplay style where you choose 2 heroes and you can switch between them as you battle. So you choose 2 heroes instead of 1. It was amazing. It was the first game that started the whole Marvel vs. Capcom franchise, and man did it start it. The game used the 4 meg RAM cartridge, just like Marvel vs. Capcom, to sort of increase the character. I think basically what it did was increase the character's animations, and you can absolutely tell this was almost completely arcade perfect. The sprite work in these games is absolutely amazing, 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 amazing. There's a ton of characters. There are 17 different characters. And again, these were all the Marvel characters that I loved when I was a kid. I loved the X-Men too. They were sort of my section of the Marvel universe that I loved the most. And so, X-Men versus Street Fighter. Again, I got this from EB Games in America. They imported it for me. And man, I was blown away by this game. The gameplay is so good. The characters are so good. The animations are so good. Oh, this is classic Capcom right here. This is one of the best fighting games on the system. It's such a good classic Capcom 2D fighting game. And this is obviously the best home version. The PlayStation version, not even in the same stratosphere as this version. All right, Y like O is a crapshoot, but I had to choose something. So I chose a game called Yellow Brick Road. Developed by Synergy Inc., it was published by Acclaim. It was released in Japan only in 1996. And it's probably one of the weirdest games I've ever played. But like I said, Y is a real tough one on the Saturn. There is no good Y games, so this would be the best of the Y games, I guess. So let's go through it. Yellow Brick Road is a turn-based JRPG based on The Wizard of Oz. I don't know, I can't stop laughing after saying that out loud. Yes, it's based on The Wizard of Oz. It's got really, really weird characters, weird voice acting. It does have, turn-based RPG battles, which are super weird. The enemies don't seem to have hit points. You have to hit them and scoot them off the screen. I don't know what the thought process was when they developed this game, but it's a turn-based RPG, so it might be worth playing to some people. I had to use Google Translate to get through just this footage here. But Yellow Brick Road, there it is. If you never knew there was a Wizard of Oz based RPG on the Sega Saturn, well, now you know. Go look it up, go buy it at your local Hard Off and have a weird old time. And that brings us to Z. The best Z game on the Sega Saturn is another fighting game. It's called Zero Divide: The Final Conflict. It was exclusive to Japan, again, released in 1997, developed and published by Zoom. Zero Divide, it's a 3D fighting game, obviously. It plays a lot like Virtua Fighter. It plays a little like Virtua Fighter crossed with Fighting Vipers because it's got a Fighting Vipers sort of system in it where you can destroy the armor of your enemies. And that's why it's on the list. It plays a lot like Virtua Fighter. It's not too flashy or anything like that, but the graphics are super good. And the destructible armor is way better than fighting Vipers. And fighting Vipers, it would only happen, you know, once per battle or so. But gradually, as you go through a battle in Zero Divide, pieces of, you know, the other robot that you're fighting's armor will slowly fall off piece by piece to reveal, you know, bare like circuitry underneath and stuff. And it gives it a super unique sort of, you know, graphical pizzazz. So it's fun. It's a 3D, you know, fighter in the vein of Virtual Fighter. It's got a lot of the same moves as Virtual Fighter. The backgrounds are good. The graphics are great. I love the destructible armors and stuff like that. So I definitely do. I think it's a worthy place on the list for sure. Best Z game on the list. I had a lot of fun playing it, and you know, looking at the cool graphics and all that good stuff. So Zero Divide, The Final Conflict, the best Z game, the last game on the list for the Sega Saturn. And there we go, the best Sega Saturn games from A to Z. Whether you want to have a conversation, whether you want to talk about this list, let me know below. Let's have a conversation. Subscribe and do all that good stuff below. Check out the sponsor, Dubby. Check out the store for some cool shirts, shop.enemyzero.com, and keep tuning into the channel. Let me know if you like these sort of long format videos where it's a little bit more than just, you know, a top 5 list or something like that. And I don't know, guys, gals, non-binary pals, thanks for tuning in again. Thanks for any support you give me. I appreciate it, and I cherish it in my heart. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, peace out.